AutoLine After Hours is brought to you by Bridgestone Tires, solutions for your journey, and by Borg Warner.
Mr. V.
John, how are you?
Doing well. You too?
Yes. So last week you were joking about me having power since it had rained here. And so that night I lost power for 2.5 days. I just want you to know that.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
Your observations had an effect.
I jinxed you.
So when I was looking for something that happened today, I chanced upon something that claimed that in 1952, on August 31st, that the Henry Ford trade school was closed. And I thought it was a little odd that it would close at the end of August. So I searched a little bit more and went to the Henry Ford, which is a compendium of all things automotive, and discovered that it had actually closed in July of 1952. So after 36 years, after training more than 8,000 young people in automotive manufacturing, it shut down because Henry Ford II decided that he wanted to reduce Ford spending on anything that was not income producing. So I say to you, don't you think that like right now would be a time that the industry could really use something like that?
Absolutely right, Gary. Absolutely right. And especially with the transition to electric vehicles and software-defined vehicles, there's a crying need for it right now. Every single automaker and supplier is screaming they can't get the people that they need. So yeah, I mean, that's another example going back to 1952 of the lack of discipline that American capital has. American capital, long-term investments, that long-term is the end of the year. And so to close down schools saying, well, it's not producing revenue, but it's so short-sighted. It's just extraordinary to me.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. So we should bring into somebody who is actually training young people, among other things.
Right. Eric Noble at CARLAB. And we've got Larry Vellequette from Automotive News.
Good afternoon.
Hi, guys.
Yeah.
And Eric, you're coming to us from Art Center, I think?
Alas, we are between terms. Otherwise, yes, on a Thursday, I'd be coming to you from our campus in Pasadena overlooking the Rose Bowl. No, I'm coming to you from our studio, the CARLAB studio in Orange County, California, in a little town called Orange.
Yeah. But Eric, let's hear, what do you think? Closing down trade schools? And I would extend that. I would say shop class in high schools, closing them, I think was another bad idea. I think we're really paying the price for not training people in vocations as well as, in trades.
Agreed. I'm a lass, right? Maybe that's part of the problem. I'm a product of high school auto shop, right? That's what got me interested in studying this stuff. We're lucky. We still have a lot of applications for Art Center. A lot of those are international. That's fine too. We'd love to see more of them come domestically. But as a country right now, we're not investing enough in education generally. 100% agreed. It shows up in lack of techs. Techs are in short supply for sure.
Critical short. Yeah. What do you think, Larry?
It sounds to me like from your conversation that the Deuce was the original confession of a capital junkie, right?
Right. That's right.
Those of us have been around long enough to remember Sergio's missive and the lessons that he imparted on that day to the great credulity of much of the industry. But he's been proven right.
So Eric, the last time we had you on the show, it was a few years ago now, you very, I think, controversially, can't even say the word. You
Something just like that.
Yeah.
You stirred things up by basically saying that EVs were an economic non-starter. How do you feel today?
Vindicated. Look, we're at. First of all, I want you to know the studio that I'm coming to you from, right? Our CARLAB studio and our nearby atelier. 75% of our work is still on EVs or electrified vehicles. So it's not us crying the blues because we're not part of the rock band. But we're still only at about a 7% US market. More importantly, though, if you look at the states that have really leaned against this a long time, right? And we're in one, right? In California. We go back to, the EV1 was released in 96 as a 97 model year. We're coming up on 30 years, gang, of the second big push of EVs in the North American market. And interestingly here, our dealers recently had a really telling experience, which is sales got up to about 1 car in 4 was EV, about 25%. Right about that same time, their inventories of EVs grew to, somewhere between 3 months and half a year. In other words, peak EV in wealthy, non-reality Southern California, Orange County, peak EV here is 25%. And that's with massive incentives, right? The average EV leaves with at least $10,000 in government incentives, and on a secondary basis gets another $10,000 to $12,000 in incentives from EV credits that are then sold. So we had in Orange County, right, EV Central, Southern California, we reached 25%. Inventories became stratospheric, and we had an average of $20,000 subsidization on every one of those units. So, yep, what we'd say is what we've been saying all along. The natural market is somewhere between 20 and 30%. That's with the incentives. Southern California is proving that. The second incentives turned off with IRA, sales fall into a crater. So yes, vindicated.
Yeah, but Eric, as you know, number one, Tesla's outselling Toyota in California. I don't think anybody saw that coming, especially not Toyota. And it's pretty much just Tesla's in the ball game, right? I mean, Ford's barely gotten going, GM's barely gotten going, Honda's not even in the party. Nissan's got some, old product. They're trying to get this Aria going. Maybe the Germans are there a little bit with Mercedes and BMW, but we haven't even seen the whole rollout of car companies having these things available for people to buy.
John, you're right, and that's what's so scary, because as all those products come from all those manufacturers and all their brands, they're targeting basically the same small slice of the population, right? And this is why it's so much news for the other car makers when anybody cuts their EV prices, right? So Tesla cuts prices, everybody has to follow suit. And look, Ford sells a lot of EVs, General Motors sells a lot of EVs, Hyundai, Kia sell a lot of EVs, and any one of those four, because they all live in the same petri dish, feels it when anyone else's sales pick up. So that petri dish we could think of as that's the pie. That pie is somewhere around 25% of buyers. And we're going to have more models, to your point, John, entering, but they're going to be competing for those same wealthy, suburban, enclosed garage with 240 volt electric service households with at least one or two other cars that aren't EVs. And that total population, oh, and by the way, did we mention the transaction price is going to be north of $55,000, right? So these are wealthy suburbanites with multiple vehicles, an enclosed garage, and 240 volts, somewhere with a nice climate. That just isn't a big slice of the American market.
So Larry, you cover Volkswagen very carefully, and they're
others,
yeah. Well, Toyota's the other one, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so VW is pushing really hard on EVs, and for the first half, the ID4 in terms of sales came in number 4, which is really good in terms of the EV sales. So I mean, what do you hear when you talk to the people at VW?
Well, they executed this plan where they localized production before the IRA passed. So they were the only foreign nameplate to be able to qualify early on for the full $7,500 subsidy nationwide
for purchasing.
For purchasing, right?
Everybody qualifies with leasing.
Yeah, well,
everyone figured out how to bring back the 7,500. Yes.
Yeah, that it got resurrected, didn't it? But I think what Volkswagen corporate is saying is all is well. It's going according to plan, right? You go out into the field and talk to dealers that are outside of the coast, the typical coast. So remember, Volkswagen dealers, over 98% of them signed up to sell the ID series, right? The ID4 and above. But you go out into the field, and the dealers are sitting on them for months, and they're not getting their local markets are saturated already.
But I would also point out ID4 isn't exactly the best EV on the market.
John.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sorry. If you want to bring people into the EV segment, you better be there with a competitive product. And I'm sorry.
Are you saying that a car with 4 windows and only 2 window switches is not competitive? Come on, John.
Larry, what you're pointing out is the unnatural acts that car makers are having to go to try to strip cost out of these things. Because let's be frank, the bill of materials is 50% dominated by the battery, right? So, we got vehicles that are missing all sorts of things. Teslas are missing instrument clusters. Volkswagens are missing window switches, right? Lots of these EVs are missing metal roofs. They're missing a lot of things. They're going to be missing a lot more things as people like Farley try to figure out how in heaven's name they're going to pull the cost out when half of it is a battery, the cost of which is higher this year than it was last year.
Yeah, but
so Volkswagen can't be blamed.
Yeah, actually, on the window switches, the reason it only has 2 instead of 4 is because the 4 set wouldn't fit in the door. But that's another
their story, and they're sticking to it.
Yeah, there is. You did mention something, Eric, that you and I have talked about before. That's interesting with this, right? Which is that unlike a traditional ICE vehicle, because the majority of the car is actually the battery, and the majority of the battery is mined minerals that don't scale, right? They don't get less expensive the more you get. They get more expensive the more you get.
Oh, that's not true. Come on. Raw material prices have come down dramatically in the last year. Dramatically. Lithium, cobalt, manganese have all dropped. And look, and it's not because there's more mining going on. It's because the supply chains choked up and everything. There was a big demand. Prices went through the roof in 20 and 21. They started to level off in 22, 2023. Boom, prices are coming down very quickly in terms of raw materials.
All right, finite market.
All right, John. I've as always, I have the data which will belie this little bit. So S&P Global Mobility just came out with a study of minerals related to EVs, and they said, and I quote, "For lithium, we forecast a 6-fold increase in demand between 2022 and 2023 for light passenger applications. We also expect lithium markets to be in deficit by 2027, creating a bottleneck for automotive supply. Resolution will be slow as lithium takes an average of 15.7 years to reach the market after initial discovery. Copper, which is already under significant pressure, and industry leaders are predicting a shortage by the end of the decade. And then there are the rare earth metals, germanium and gallium. By 2025, 80% of the e-axle based motors will need those materials. And as a result, we estimate that well over 90% of the world's production-ready magnets will be mainland Chinese manufactured. So it ain't so smooth, even if
Well, I'm not saying that it's smooth. I'm just saying that raw material prices have come down in price, from their sky high price levels of 2021, 22.
For now.
Yeah, I think it's a temporary, you're
Right.
seeing a temporary dip,
And look,
but
this
it's
is
not
why,
a trend.
yeah, and look, this is why Tesla's gone to aluminum wiring instead of copper. This is why so many automakers are going with asynchronous motors that don't use magnets. I mean, this is why they're going to LFP instead of NMC to get away. So I'm not, all I'm saying, I don't see the doom and gloom. I see the industry quickly going to other alternatives. And while the batteries are still expensive, it's the processing that's where you're going to see huge reductions in manufacturing costs. Whereas the raw materials may not come down much more than where they are right now. The processes needed to turn them into batteries or things into electric motors, we're about to see huge improvements in that.
John, I think it'd be instructive to think of this as something akin to making steel, right? So you're right, we'll always make the process better because that's what humans do, and that's what free industry does. It innovates, right? And it creates efficiency. The challenge that we face with batteries, though, is the same challenge that we face with steel or other processed alloys, which is we're at a point where now easily 80% of total cost, right? So if you bought billet steel, only 20% of the cost of that billet steel is the processing and running the business. That's only 20%. We're there on batteries. So yep, we're going to get better at processing it, but realize as we get better at making batteries, the percentage of battery bill of materials cost that is just raw input, the metals and the minerals will increase.
Yeah.
So our ability to scale these, to Gary's earlier point, and to Larry's too, is nil. There's no scale to this. In fact, actually, we've extracted just about all the efficiencies out to about the same point that we see in metal alloys. So, and John, what you're talking about is, okay, sure, it's like the steel market. So if steel gets really expensive, people can we'll switch to other metals, right? And there is some ability to shift, and we're going to see our industry try to explore other battery chemistries, but in the end, those are metal-based too, right? So, and even if we look at solid state, which is coming, the numbers aren't amazing. On a per kilowatt hour basis, solid state is not really amazingly less expensive. It's not amazingly less heavy. It's not amazingly less volumetric. It is substantial gains in all those areas except really cost, right? So I don't think there's an efficiency way out of this. There's not a scale way out of this. The only way out of this is for us as a global society to admit that we should use horses for courses, and prescribing a single answer to solve our climate problems has been a disaster.
Yeah. No, hey, look, I would agree. Too much has been thrown on the back of the automotive industry, which in the United States accounts for, depending on the latest EPA study, 14% of greenhouse gases. So, and I've been arguing this all along is, what about the other 87%? And, most of that lies with public utilities, generating plants, and they're only now starting to face regulations. But so I agree with you on that, but I don't agree that we're not going to get scale that will drive down the cost of the batteries.
There's no indication that's happening.
We just had, Mujib Ijaz from One on the show 2 weeks ago, and he's claiming he's going to be able to, he's got a very fascinating approach of using a battery as a range extender, slightly different chemistry battery, but he's claiming he can get that down to $50 per kilowatt hour. So I believe we are going to see a crossover point late in this decade, 2027, 2028, crossover point where it becomes cheaper to manufacture electric cars than ICE ones.
Well,
Eric, we should have probably done this earlier in the show. There are probably people who are watching who are looking at you and saying, "Who the hell is this guy from the CARLAB? What is the CARLAB?" So, tell us a little bit about that and why you know what you know.
Oh, all right. The CARLAB helps car makers and suppliers plan and design new vehicles. So we usually we do strategic work that is 5 to 10 years out on what should portfolios be, et cetera. But really on the brass tacks level, everything we do is from 60 months out to about 24 months out from start of production for a new vehicle or a new vehicle platform. So we work with the J3, the Big Three, the K2, and some of the Europeans. And it's essentially platform planning or vehicle model line planning, a little bit of trim level planning. We also do that for some of the world's biggest suppliers. It's not us. So when we talk about the future of the industry, we're not giving away anybody's secrets, right? That's what they're planning is none of anybody's business. And it's even a secret that we've worked on particular programs. But what we know in general is all car makers face the same existential dilemma given 100% mandates. By the way, it would even affect Tesla because Tesla is getting $3,000 an EV credit for selling the credits for the EVs they sell, and they only have a market for those because of the manufacturers that make ICEs and need to buy the credits, right? So actually, this is 100% mandates are an existential crisis for the entire car industry. We won't get there. That's okay. The question is, what does it look like on the way, right? And then the ACCD behind my name is Art Center College of Design, where I'm I think about to enter my 20th year as a professor teaching vehicle technology to future car designers. So.
Larry, you also look into Toyota. Tell us about what Toyota's sense is for electrification.
Well, it's evolving, which to me is a little disappointing just on a personal level, but their sense is that for now, with infrastructure where it is, that there's no vehicle that shouldn't have at least a hybrid choice, that hybrids make the most sense for the most people, but that they still need to offer full ICE vehicles. They need to have more hybrids, more plug-in hybrids in this transition time, and that battery electrics also have a place in the overall market. And I think that's hard to argue with, especially for those of us in the middle of the country that don't live in plug-in-istan.
So Larry, you said it's evolving, Toyota strategy, and you're disappointed. So what is the evolution and what's your disappointment?
Well, let me start with the evolution. The evolution is simply that with the change in leadership, I think you're seeing, oh no, here comes Toyota's bomber fleet. With the change in leadership, with Akio moving up to the chairman's role, with Sato-san coming in as CEO, I think you've already seen some indications, and if you recall Akio's presentation in December of 21, where they rolled out 16 EVs that they said we're on the way. I think they are feeling market pressure and pressure from political pressure to move more quickly to EVs, right? I think that's undeniable. The disappointment to me is that I think that their strategy makes sense. I think it's realistic that the transition has to be gradual, and I think the rest of the American public are kind of discovering that, and that we can't have, as Eric says, 100% mandate because it doesn't work. But I think their strategy right now is the proper one, I think they're going to they may end up abandoning it or trying to push up the EVs because the market or political leaders say they have to before they're really ready.
I'll give you a slightly different point of view, and this comes from an off-the-record, very background statement from a very senior level Toyota executive who said they underestimated how fast battery costs were going to come down, and they underestimated the great run-up that they're seeing globally of people going to EVs, especially in China and Europe, but even in the US. And they knew they had to do something different. And that's why Sato-san, as you call him, started this new business unit within Toyota called the BEV Factory. Yeah. Very similar to what Ford's doing with Model E and what Renault's doing with Ampere, of deciding that, hey, we cannot rely on the old system run by ICE people to figure out how to crack the code and come out with the kind of EVs that the market really wants. And so I think it's not just political pressure. I think it was market pressures that forced Toyota's hand.
Eric, what do you think about this portfolio approach that Toyota has for now?
Yeah, Larry makes an very, very interesting point, which is Toyota has been on this for a long time, and it is a portfolio approach, and it's mixed powertrains. He also identified very correctly there was tremendous outside pressure that ultimately Toyota's board felt for them to look more EV forward, right? We don't find any evidence in what we do here that there was any market pressure, right? Consumers already don't want the percentage of EVs that we're currently selling. That's why as soon as we remove the $7,500 incentive, the Hyundai Kia sales of EVs, which are great EVs, fall off a cliff, right? If the market wanted those, we wouldn't be relying on $10,000 incentives, right, to sell them, right, between state and government. So the market doesn't want EVs at the level we're already selling them. Let's be blunt. Any manufacturer that's doing research in North America knows this. Everyone knows it. The question is, how do we proceed forward as a car maker? We need to look like good students. The teacher up front, the federal government, and a lot of local governments have said, thou shalt make EVs. So they need to look like they're behaving, but they need to pay for it. And John, you mentioned something really interesting, which is that there are independent business units now at some of the car makers. I don't know really what caused those internally, but I think they're going to be great because they're never going to be profitable, right? And what that's going to prove, and I don't think Ford was cynical when they did it, for instance, but Farley's trying to run a division that can't be profitable, particularly without Lincoln being a strong luxury manufacturer. I mean, Porsche can sell Taycans profitably, right? So there's some level at which we can make a profit on an EV, but it probably is at least $70,000, $80,000 product. And that's not where Ford is. So Ford's going to lose money every year on Model E. Anybody else that has an EV division is going to lose money on that every year. That may be helpful at such point that the car makers need to go back to governments and say, look, we get it on global warming. We believe we have kids too. We want to make a difference, but continuing to lean against this problem with a single solution has gotten us to 7% EV. And we've been trying this for almost 30 years. So how much longer are we going to bullshit ourselves and say we're priming the pump? We're not priming the pump. There's no pump.
But Eric, I hear what you're saying on 30 years. Let's take it back over 120. Let's go back to the Baker Electric, Right. Let's go back to the Detroit Electric. I think that's an unfair comparison. I mean, the EV1 was a great car, but it was nickel metal hydride, it was not even a competitive EV to today's standards. And
John, I have 1907 books in our library behind me.
Right.
And when they lay out a comparison between steam, electric, and gasoline vehicles, what those 110-year-old books say about EV, let's see if this sounds familiar, is They're great for urban use, not far from electricity, short distances, right? Because recharge times are long, the batteries are heavy, big, and expensive. Does that sound at all unfamiliar to what we face today? We just switched from iron batteries to lead, to nickel metal hydride, to lithium. So we went up the table of elements food chain, and what we did is we made better and better batteries, but they're more and more expensive. And what we're chasing is a buying public that for every vehicle, ICE2 wants a 400-mile range. This doesn't have anything to do with infrastructure. In fact, people love to charge at home. They don't want to charge in the field, right? So we need 400-mile ranges. That's going to be really expensive. Those batteries are going to be big, large, mass-wise, and expensive. Meanwhile, Toyota can't make enough Prius Primes. Jeep sells 4xEs all day long, 6 days a week and twice on Sunday. So we have ample evidence. And right now we're in an evaluation vehicle, a Honda CR-V hybrid, which is amazing. Let's remember, gentlemen, we only need to get back to 1994 levels of carbon output from our vehicle fleet. So what we've been doing, which is a game of the emperor has new clothes, right, isn't working. Mary Nichols is a climate criminal. She's no different than deniers like Donald Trump, because the results are the same. We're nowhere. We're 7%. If we'd had admitted that we needed a blended solution years ago, my kids, who are 18 and 22 now, would be on the hottest planet we'd ever experienced. Sorry.
I go back, and I know we got to take a break here soon. I go back to something that that Sergio Marchionne said in 2013, right? When the EPA limits were up to 55. And I'll never forget this. He came out, I think we were in Las Vegas. He came out at a press conference and he said, look, he said, I've got, this was in 13. I think he had to get to 2021. He says, I've got 8 years. Don't tell me, give me the target. Don't tell me how to get there. And I thought, that has stuck with me, because that's really the goal, right? The goal is getting rid of carbon. It's not to fill the streets with EVs. And if we you take the limits off automakers and say, look, you just have to lower it. Don't care how you do it, just lower it. That would have been the right strategy, but we didn't do that.
Free market innovation would have handled it, Larry.
Yeah, but we didn't do that because the market only rewarded only was looking for the second Tesla, right, to chase the returns.
I agree with that. Well, let's take a quick commercial break and come back to this.
Damn right.
He said it.
How do Bridgestone tires stop shorter on wet roads? It's their HydroTrack technology. But you don't have to know how the science works, just where the brake is. What really matters is their Bridgestone.
All right, we're back. So, Eric, I'm going to challenge you on a couple of things here. You say we're stuck at 7%, but, look, none of the legacies have come out with a truly clean sheet EV. They're still on their first generation. Let's pull stuff out of the parts bin and do an EV that way. We're not going to see their best efforts until 2025, 2026. Same with batteries. We're going to see second generation batteries around that time frame. And I put to you that you're going to see a whole lot better than 7% at that point. And they will be able to make money on this, because remember, Tesla lost money for a decade. It lost billions. And then it hit that magic inflection point where that production ramp goes up that did the hockey stick thing. And now it's one of the most profitable car companies in the world. So I don't buy your argument that Ford cannot make a profit with Model E, or Renault with Ampere, or Toyota with with the BEV factory.
You raise good points, John, but one of the things we have to remember is, look, every Tesla sold in North America still has really at least $20,000 of subsidy on the hood, right? From taxpayers, right? Look, I'm a Sierra Club member. I'm not anti-environment, but let's not kid ourselves and say this is working. Look, Musk is an interesting character for sure, right? Because on one hand, we have Tesla saying, hey, government, stay out of our hair. And on the other hand, we have Tesla very happily seeing government give its buyers $10,000 in incentives, and other car makers give Tesla another $10,000 to $12,000 in incentives, and that's if we don't include gas taxes. So I don't at all buy the argument that Tesla's profitable. Take their volume and multiply it by $20,000 a unit at least in incentives, and let's see what the real math looks like. The other car makers actually have to make money, or at least until they go bankrupt and the government's bailed them out, right? and it's going to be, yeah, that happens.
Yeah, that's never going to happen again. There's my prediction.
Right,
they
right.
will never get bailed out again, not in this country.
So
They'll go bankrupt, but they will get bailed out.
They will go bankrupt and goodbye.
Yeah, that's right. Look, EVs work for a portion of the market, right? I mean, I'm coming to you from Orange County. So if you went to the average $1 million home here with a 2-car garage, an EV is a great fit. Household income's $250,000. There's another ICE. They only charge at home. They don't have to worry about the infrastructure. But really, for the rest of America, this doesn't work, right? And we have a lot of evidence that says other forms of powertrain are very cheap. If the battery is the 800-pound gorilla here, what we need to think about is, look, batteries are very helpful only because they feed electricity to an electric motor, and electric motors are 97% efficient. They're amazing, right? All right, good. We can't run an electric cord to every EV. We need to have a battery because we want to use motors to power cars. The game that we should be playing is sizing batteries appropriately based on the duty cycle and combining them with other forms of propulsion, right? That's what Wrangler 4xe does. That's what Prime does. That's what the Honda CR-V does. The emission signatures of those vehicles are incredibly low. In fact, John, there's a good argument that plug-in hybrids will actually drive more miles all electric than full BEVs because consumers aren't afraid to jump in their plug-in and go on a road trip to Yellowstone.
Yeah, but the evidence suggests, and this comes out of Europe, this comes out of the US, they don't plug in their PHEVs. I mean, they plug them in less than half the time. And in fact, both the European regulatory agencies and the EPA are saying, wait a minute, we're giving way too much credit for PHEVs. They should not count as heavily as they do for CAFE because they don't get plugged in.
You raise a good point. And one of the things Larry mentioned, I think, is important. If we allow different solutions, right, and we were using results, right, or evidence to set policy, one of the things we would do is say, look, we have telemetry now to every vehicle. Let's use telemetry and let's start basing things rather than on window stickers printed on with ink on paper. Let's start using electric vehicle miles traveled. We can collect the actual data. I think, to Larry's point, car makers cut free to meet GHG targets any way they can would very quickly have vehicles with mixed powertrains and telemetry, and even the California Air Resources Board would be satisfied that we knew exactly how many electric vehicle miles were traveled by every one of those units. So yep, we do need a good system, and we need to be able to police it, John, 100%, right? Because cynical use, and we saw this with going way back to yellow badge popcorn fueled vehicles from the 90s, right? We don't need cynical solutions. We need to reduce our GHG.
Right.
Eric, let me ask you 2 questions, one for each of your professional roles. You said that you're working with major OEMs on programs that are in the future. How many of them are looking at EV programs? How many of them are looking at hybrid programs? How many of them are looking at straight ICE programs? And the other question is, how many of your students are interested in designing things that are not electric?
Those are really good questions. Let's answer the OE one first. OEs have to operate based on the regulations that are before them, right? And this is what Toyota is facing. The regulations before them are called mandates. They vary by state, by federal jurisdiction, and then globally by country. So the car makers are in a situation where they absolutely have to plan for those mandates, and all of them that we work for diligently are. At the same time, what we see all of them doing is uncanceling ICE programs that they had scheduled for cancellation, and unscheduling the shuttering of engine plants, unscheduling the changeover of full production assembly plants, and continuing ICE platforms. So 5 years ago, there were a bunch of projected removals at car makers of ICEs from the portfolio. Everyone was planning that. What we see now is last minute saves of, we can't cancel that, that makes money. We lose money on all these EVs, so no, we're not canceling this ICE SUV. No, we're not going to get rid of this luxury ICE. No, we're not going to get rid of this full-size pickup, because this is what funds the EV side of the house. So are they still planning on the mandates? They are, but they're having to run sort of a rearguard action to protect their finances. And what I would say obliquely is most of the car makers at this point are doing what we call scenario planning. And scenario planning is running multiple potential futures. One of those potential futures is as mandated. The others are basically all different assumptions around what we call non-attainment. And non-attainment just says, look, California has set regulations before in the 90s that automakers didn't hit. California regulators and EPA regulators figured out how to backpedal on that and still have, legal vehicles sold. So I think all the car makers at this point, I can't speak for GM. I don't speak for any, but GM maintains differently publicly, let's put it this way. I think the rest of them, it would be safe to say, are all scenario planning. Only one of those scenarios includes full BEV mandates. The other scenarios are all a lesser implementation, even though right now that's not on the books legally, because they all know they have to survive, if that makes any sense. And the question as to what are the students interested in designing? Here's the good news. People go to whether it's Art Center College of Design or CCS in Detroit or Pforzheim in Germany or Royal College of Art in England. They go because they're passionate about transportation. They're passionate about cars and trucks, right? And we find them happily agnostic as to what powers them. We have some students that couldn't be more stoked about a world that is BEV only. We have some students that want to do hybrid military vehicles, and we have students that just want to put V8s in things. And I think that sort of represents a cross-section of enthusiasts in society. So are they all coming to design one type of car? No. And what we teach them is, please be agnostic to powertrain. For some buyers, BEV is the right answer. Please know how to design for them. For some buyers, diesel will remain the answer. Know how to design for them. For some, nat gas may be. For some, ICE may be. For some, it may be HEV. So their task as designers isn't to choose winners technologically. Their task is to meet buyer needs. And the only way we can do that is to know the buyers. And if we really know the buyers, we've got to admit there's probably a different powertrain solution for one buyer versus another versus another. It's the same way mankind got to more than 200 breeds of horses.
Yeah. Hey, Gary, I want to bring up a point on what Eric talked about earlier, which is the point about mandates, right? I really think that part of this issue where we're at right now, this transition issue, is a marketing problem. We've told, the automakers especially, have told consumers that, and sold consumers that EVs are a direct substitution for ICE vehicles, right? And I don't think they are yet. But I think that there's a larger portion of this to me is how we get from 7% to 10 or 12. I think there's a large proportion and a growing proportion of, especially in the US, of people who are willing to contribute, who see the change in weather and say, okay, I'm ready to contribute, but I'm not ready to go all in. And if we offered them a way to say that, look, you don't have to give up your ICE vehicle. EVs, and everybody on this call knows, EVs are fantastic second vehicles. And they ought to be the second vehicle in every garage in America, right? Owning two ICE vehicles, unless you have special circumstances where you both drive a hell of a lot, is kind of ridiculous. You can have one EV. And that's the message that needs to be delivered. And that's how you grow that market share. But telling people, look, you have to go to this more expensive powertrain, and this is the only way that you can contribute and help stop these horrible storms or whatever argument you want to make, I think that's wrong. And I think it's really been a mistake on the part of the automakers and driven again by the market that only rewards purity, right?
So Larry,
amen.
The question I have is that Eric is suggesting that it is impossible to make money off of EVs that are not 60, 70, 80,000 bucks. And when you talk about people having a second vehicle, I mean, a lot of people have a tough time owning one vehicle. So how are we going to get to this second one, especially if the second one is going to be so expensive?
Because the second one doesn't need to have 400 miles of range. That's how you get there.
Or an 800 volt internal charging system.
Right. It only has to be, it has to be the golf cart to run around town, right? It has to be 150 miles of range. It has to be cheap. It can be that second vehicle. It's just the problem is we're designing for direct substitution. We're designing for that it has to be 400 miles, which means it needs a giant battery, which means it needs a solid state battery, if not, or the magic battery, right? Because that's the only way to get to 400. But you don't need that. You don't need that range if it's a second vehicle. Or if your first vehicle ought to be a hybrid, and your second vehicle ought to be an EV, and then you're done. And you're contributing.
And Gary, to your point, there are a lot of households that can't afford a full BEV, even if it's a 250 mile range, right? Even if that's an 80 kilowatt hour battery, they're still not going to be able to afford that. And I think what we're missing is we need to provide solutions there too, right? One of the things that we often talk about internally with our car maker clients is SFRs. It's an acronym, SFR, and it's single family residence. And, look, to be blunt, right now, nobody at an OE that knows what they're doing plans an EV for any target buyer that doesn't live in an SFR. In other words, EVs are only planned for single family residences with enclosed garages. That is the end of the discussion. Because what we know is anybody who makes the mistake of buying an EV and doesn't live like that has to really sacrifice practicality. They're stopping at a Walmart on the way home every other day and sitting and charging for a half an hour. Or they're stopping at a charging network with their ID4 because they got free charging, but at their apartment complex, they don't, right? EVs, full BEVs, don't work for people that don't live in an SFR. And what we're not providing them is any alternative. a hybrid is a great alternative for those people and will reduce GHG tremendously. But the scheme that the California Air Resources Board has going forward, and that the following states, New York, et cetera, have also adopted, leaves less and less place for hybrid in future portfolios. And that is a dreadful mistake. The current policy is actually going to cause global warming because we're pursuing perfection, and perfection, as we teach Art Center students, is the enemy of good.
Right.
And what we want is good.
Yeah. Look, I agree with all that, but you guys are looking at this from a 2023 snapshot in time. By 2028, so much of this is going to be resolved. We're going to have much faster charging. We're going to have far more ubiquitous charging. There's going to be a reality setting in that we don't have to fast charge everything. Level 2 in public places, even level 1 in certain public places, like at the airport, where you go away for a few days. Charging at 110 is fine. You're going to come back to a fully charged battery. So what I'm getting at is in about 5 years, in less than 5 years' time, I keep saying this 2025, 2026 timeframe, we're going to see second generation everything that is going to be a leap step ahead of where we're at right now. And Eric, I believe by the end of this year, we're going to be awfully close, if not at 10% market share, not locked into the 7%.
So what is the market share if we take Tesla out of that?
Well, a whole lot less.
A lot
It's
less.
half,
They're
right?
they're half the market.
Yeah, they're half the market. But, look at what GM's bringing to the market in the second half of this year. Or look at Ford having just ramped up production of the Mach-E and the F-150. And it may be a problem selling those vehicles, to your point, Eric, but a truism in the automotive industry is every car and truck that gets built gets sold. They do not disassemble them at the end of the year and send the components back to the suppliers. They get sold. And so that's why I feel we'll be at 10% by the end of this year. And my prediction, by the way, even though I'm all in on this, I think by 2030, it's going to be 1 out of 3 electric. I think, the administration's goal of 50% by 2030, I'll call that a stretch goal. I'll call this the EPA's goal of getting to, what is it? It's something crazy. By 2032, they want 75% electric. I'll call that an impossibility. And look, I'm all in on this. I want to see it happen. Yes, but, to the points that you guys are raising, we got to be realists here. I just think I'm on the more optimistic side of realism than you guys are.
John, can I ask you a question?
You may. That's why we have this show. That's why we got you on this show.
Since we differ in opinion.
Yeah.
Can I only ask you, and you are far more of an optimistic futurist than I am. I just want to know, where's my flying car?
They're working on it. Look, these VTOLs keep making great strides all along. And in fact, I think the first really public awareness of VTOLs are going to come next year at the Paris Olympics. I know the plan is to shuttle a lot of, and then in Eric's neck of the woods in 2028 in Los Angeles, the plans are to have VTOLs, because the traffic in Southern California is crazy. So is the traffic in Paris. And so it's coming, Larry. It's coming.
Okay. But Popular Mechanics said it would have been here, 15, 20 years ago, right?
Well, look,
for all the other optimistic futurists out there.
You know how technology goes. We all think it's going to happen faster than it does.
That's right.
And then after it hits, we're just amazed at how fast it happened.
Eric, let me ask you, going back to Larry's observation about the second vehicle being something that is not a Swiss Army knife of a vehicle, which generally vehicles tend to be. Do you see much of an appetite for cars that don't have full-blown capabilities?
Alas, not so far. I agree with Larry, right? In a household where we had probably a 3-vehicle choice, we could have a 200-mile range commuter, which would make a great impact on carbon emissions and never leave that household stranded. unfortunately, consumers, particularly in North America, have been trained, kind of like John, to expect better and better and better. And one of the things that we fight, and we see it all the time when we're doing research with consumers, look, range anxiety doesn't go away. In fact, we shouldn't call it range anxiety because that belittles the people that suffer it, right? We don't call people handicapped anymore either, right? They're differently abled. This is not range anxiety. That's an insult to buyers. It's range demand. And what they demand, particularly people that own EVs, is more range in their next EV. Because actually, they like the experience of having an EV. It's like they can charge it at home. There aren't oil changes. Brakes are changed less often, right? The manufacturer has often loaded it with the latest technology, ADAS, et cetera, right? And if they charge at home, their cost per mile traveled is actually pretty low because they're using residential electricity often at night to put in the battery to store for use during the day. So these people are incredibly happy with their EVs, except for one thing: they want more range. And their rationale is, A, I'm a consumer, so it's what I deserve. B, I have been trained, like John says, the technology continues apace. So yeah, my current EV gets me a tick over 300, but I'll never shop a future one that doesn't get 400. And intriguingly, range demand, not anxiety, does not go down with ownership. In fact, we usually find if we research owners versus considerers, in other words, people who are experienced with EVs versus people who've never owned one, the owners want more range than those who consider EVs. So alas, I don't think that range demand will diminish. I think car makers are doing all of this research. They don't have to use us. There's lots of other ways they can find these same answers, and they are. So the car makers know 400 is the number because it's the number with ICE, and we got to that through research too. I did a lot of that research in the 90s. We had to tell a lot of our car makers what size gas tank to put in the car because we had done research. And everyone at that time called it range demand. No one called it anxiety. That's a belittling term we shouldn't use. Right? There aren't fat people anymore. There shouldn't be range anxiety. It's range demand, gents or people.
Can you tell my wife that there's not fat people anymore?
Hey, Eric, do EV owners want more range than ICE owners do?
No, they want the same.
Okay.
So, John, what you get, and your question is great, is there are smaller passenger car segments or smaller utility vehicle segments where 350, 370 is enough. And we find that in ICE as well. Usually the sort of the line is about 400. And then like ICE, there are segments where you like pick up larger SUVs, et cetera, where you want to deliver 450, 500, 550, or even 600, right? Look, Ford isn't accidentally putting those huge fuel tanks in their F-250s. They're doing that because they did research and buyers want that range. So really, the easiest way to summarize this is if I looked at the average range in a well-developed ICE segment, entry SUV, mid-size car, mid-size SUV, large SUV, mid-pickup, full-size pickup, et cetera, if I looked at the average range in those segments for the ICEs, that's about the range demand for the BEV in the same segment. Because, by the way, the duty cycle is the same.
Eric, let me ask you a question. So we're seeing some pushback on the regulation in the EU that some countries are saying, hey, we've got to go more slowly here. There's the possibility that we have a different administration, which leads to different rules, different mandates in the United States. What happens to the discussion of EVs. What happens to the building of EVs? What happens to the sales of EVs if these things change?
Well, what regulation driveth, lack of regulation will taketh away. Look, we screwed up. Societally, we screwed up. And here's why. We let GHG become a political issue. It's not. It's a human issue. We all face it. It doesn't matter what side of the aisle we sit on. As soon as we politicized it, we got to this problem, and you're pointing it out, which is now we have the chance of radical swings with one administration versus another. We're gonna have to solve this with compromise. It's lack of compromise that brought us to this point, right? So Democratic administrations want to drive regulations through the roof, and Republican administrations want to deny climate change. Both are bullshit positions, and both of those positions are harming my kids. John, you've got kids as well. We're not going to leave them a good planet, and it's not because we didn't want to, it's because we weren't willing to compromise.
Yeah. Amen, brother. I'm on board with that. Hey, look, we're at the top of the hour here. Eric's pronunciation there is the perfect note to end this show. It really is. But this has been a great discussion. This has been fantastic. We're going to have to come back and do this again because things will change. You know, we're going to see new cars coming in, new batteries coming in. We're going to see new administrations coming in at some point, and we're going to have to come back to this.
Of course, as we established, that things really didn't change all that much because Eric still believes the same way he believed 4 years ago or whenever it was the last time we had him on the show.
Which is in compromise. Let's be clear.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
That's right.
And I also believe Larry has his finger on it. And Larry, that discussion you gave around Toyota was spot on, right? You're paying attention. They're paying attention. And Gary and John, you guys too. And John, you know what? Thanks for being an optimist. We need them. Please. We need it.
Yeah. Look, I can't help being an optimist. My blood type is O positive.
Gary, thanks for keeping him in line.
Yeah.
I now know where his boy Elroy, where the origin of that was.
That's great. Larry, great having you on the show. Eric, brilliant as always. Can't wait till we meet again.
Likewise. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay. Thanks, everybody.
You guys.
Take care.
Cheers, guys. Bye-bye.
AutoLine After Hours is brought to you by Bridgestone Tires, solutions for your journey, and by Borg Warner.
If you like this program and would like to learn more about the automotive industry, check out our website at autoline.tv or look for us on YouTube on the AutoLine channel.